Lupin III Part 1, simply known as Lupin III in Japan, is the first Lupin anime TV series consisting of 23 episodes airing from October 1971 to March 1972. Considered by many to be the first anime created strictly for an adult audience, Part 1 stars the Lupin gang in a number of adventures, sometimes adapted from the manga and sometimes based on original stories. Despite only lasting for one season and suffering from generally poor ratings throughout, the show eventually became popular enough to kickstart Lupin's long-running anime career. It successfully translated the manga into animated form while establishing a lot of characteristics that would define the Lupin formula. This show is often given the reputation of being one of the darker and more serious Lupin anime to date, and while that is true to an extent, I don't think that's the best way to describe Part 1. Instead, it's more of an experimental series that was forced to change direction because of the circumstances surrounding its production. After the first cut of the Lupin pilot film failed to attract a buyer for a film project, the team switched gears to try and get a television anime made instead. Yomiuri Television was interested and greenlit a 26-episode series to be broadcast starting in 1971. Originally, Tsutomu Shibayama was considered for the director's position, but he was busy with other projects at the time. Tokyo Movie instead put Masaki Osumi in the director's chair, and he was one of the few staff members still on board following the pilot film, with a changing rotation of writers and key animators for each episode. Tokyo Movie president Yutaka Fujioka was impressed with Osumi's work on Obake no Kyutaro and thought he would be a great fit for handling the Lupin show. Yasuo Otsuka was also brought in from the pilot film staff to handle character designs, with his fascination for mechanical objects, guns, and vehicles also serving a huge role in the series. At this time, Otsuka was working as an animator at Toei Animation, but after his work on the television cut of the pilot film, Tokyo Movie brought him on board full-time. Osumi adapted the manga style as closely as possible, carrying over the edgy yet still humorous tone and including as much adult content as he could, though it couldn't be as profane due to obscenity standards for TV. Monkey Punch himself wasn't sure about whether or not Lupin would translate into anime, especially because the medium was still assumed to be for children and families. But after seeing the pilot film and especially seeing Osumi's work, he gave the project his blessing. Part 1 officially debuted on October 24th, 1971, and right out of the gate, the show did very poorly, with very low ratings for its first few episodes. As a comparison, Star of the Giants, another contemporary Tokyo Movie production, would often get an audience share of 20%, meaning 20% of Japanese TV viewers tuned into the program. Lupin III, by contrast, only received a maximum of 6% audience share, and at times, it could be as low as 3%. I don't have a definitive source to prove this, but I have heard that to this day, this is still a record low audience share for Yomiuri Television in its entire history. It was clear to Tokyo Movie that this series wasn't going to find an audience with its initial direction, and the network was not happy about the results. When they asked the crew what could be done about it, Osumi was apparently resolute that he had done what was asked of him, create an anime for adults. Fujioka, on the other hand, had the difficult task of trying to appease the network while keeping the show afloat. After the second episode aired, he requested that Osumi make changes to the show to make it more appealing. Osumi refused to comply, resulting in the producers firing him from the project. It's an interesting parallel to Osumi's work on the 1969 Moomin series, which he also directed. He was thus responsible for introducing adult elements and themes to that series, which angered the original author, Tove Jansson, and led to Tokyo Movie losing the license. However, Osumi was a major creative force behind the Lupin anime, and with him out of the picture, someone else needed to step up. Now that his spot was empty, the studio brought in a relatively unknown pair of animators to take his place, Hayao Miyazaki and Isao Takahata. These two are famous now for being two of the co-founders of the legendary Studio Ghibli, but at the time, the two were animators at Toei working under Yasuo Otsuka, and the two were known for the film The Great Adventure of Horace, Prince of the Sun. The two were working on an adaptation of Pippi Longstocking, but that project was shelved and they decided to take on Lupin mostly because of Otsuka's request for them to join him. They accepted under the terms that they operate anonymously, so they worked under the pseudonym of A Production. Also, coincidentally, the original name of Shinei Animation, a division of Toei Animation who would occasionally collaborate with Tokyo Movie. These two lessen the harsher elements and focus more on making the stories and characters charismatic and appealing. It came more from their disinterest in highlighting Lupin's criminal behavior and focusing on action and adventure, and to their credit, the men excelled in those fields. However, since they came in during the middle of production with several Osumi-led episodes left behind in various completion states, many episodes, especially towards the middle of the series, feel like a mishmash of the two directorial styles. It's not until about the 14th episode when A Production's directorial bend really takes over, and by that point, the series had already undergone quite an identity crisis. While ratings did slightly improve after A Production took over, reaching around 9% audience share, it wasn't enough to convince Yomiuri TV and Tokyo Movie to keep the show running for more than one season. The series ended after only 23 episodes, leaving 3 unplanned ones to bite the dust. Probably because it left the airwaves relatively quickly, Part 1 was a pretty cheap show to run in empty time slots just a few years later, particularly at night. It's in these reruns that the show finally gained its popularity, reaching very high ratings for a series that was already a few years old. Many at the time attributed the popularity to Miyazaki and Takahata's course corrections in the series' later half, and that is likely what cemented the direction the rest of the series would take. Because of its popularity in reruns, Tokyo Movie would continue to pursue Lupin anime projects, but those are subjects for another time. For now, let's analyze Part 1. It's largely because of the shift in directors that Part 1's style is kinda difficult to nail down. Many call this incarnation of Lupin the most immoral depicted in an anime, as the early episodes echo the tone and maturity of the manga, but that doesn't tell the full story. Even before Miyazaki and Takahata took over, there's still elements of the playful and mischievous side of Lupin, who doesn't take everything super seriously all the time. The Osumi episodes weren't shy about portraying Lupin as a criminal who is willing and able to commit violent, hateful acts on a whim, up to and including straight-up murder, though thankfully, much less sexual assault than the manga due to the restrictions of television. We see the events from Lupin's perspective most of the time, so we still ultimately root for him since the people he targets often deserve it, but his sense of morality is certainly more twisted here. Osumi-era episodes also favor atmosphere and suspense over mindless action, as these adventures are never afraid to slow things down a bit to draw out the tension. The show has more of an edge with these stories, with this version of Lupin dialing up the misanthropy, but also showing him more as a cool guy who's out seeking thrills and will stop at nothing to get them. And honestly, Lupin being a thief doesn't play into the story all the time. Yes, he steals things, but most of the time during the Osumi era, the thievery is born out of a major plot point and not the reason why an episode's storyline begins. By contrast, the 8 production episodes are sillier and more comedic, placing an emphasis on hijinks and antics over slow, brooding atmosphere. Lupin's violence and sexual desires are heavily toned down in favor of portraying him as a goofy and carefree, yet still intelligent and determined thief who's always looking for something to steal. The pacing is more frenetic in these episodes, with the animation showing quicker speed and wackier faces, matching the lighter personalities. Lupin and the gang definitely ramp up in frivolousness with these episodes, relishing more in having fun and the joy of stealing things rather than the more unsavory pleasures that they would seek previously. A production stories revolve more explicitly around theft and crimes than the Osumi episodes, with the thievery plot often being the genesis behind an episode's storyline, and it's only once the heist plot is either underway or finished that the non-thievery plot, if there is one, kicks in. Despite the criminal elements, Lupin is also more heroic. If he's not rescuing someone, then he's being positioned against a much greater evil, so you root for him regardless. A force of retribution rather than a force of good, if you will. If you want a more direct comparison between these two directorial styles, then there's no better place to look than at Lupin's car of choice. During the Osumi era, Lupin favors the Mercedes-Benz SSK, a car that the pilot film attributes to being a favorite car of Adolf Hitler, although this technically isn't correct. While Hitler did own several Mercedes-Benz vehicles and was a fan of the brand, the SSK itself apparently wasn't one of them. However, the idea of evoking Hitler as a comparison to Lupin, even if thankfully not in thought or deed, was meant to show the character's killer edge and darker mindset. Given the SSK's larger, longer frame, it takes up a lot of space and looks more cold and mechanical, even with its bright yellow paint job. And considering its open-air design, it makes Lupin seem more intimidating, as he isn't shielding himself behind anything, and he has so much more room to move around him. For the A-production episodes, however, the Lupin gang will more often than not be driving a Fiat, not necessarily the famous yellow Fiat 500 that later installments show him in, but a close approximation. The Fiat itself is a legendary vehicle in the Lupin series, and its association with Lupin can be attributed to Miyazaki and Otsuka. Both of them loved European vehicles, and Miyazaki himself owned a Fiat as he worked on Part 1. The Castle of Cagliostro would be the vehicle that cemented the Fiat as Lupin's vehicle of choice, but its appearance in Part 1 is certainly noteworthy. This car is more compact and rotund, squeezing its occupants into a tiny space and confining its characters more or less into one comfortable shape. It better matches his carefree personality and makes him seem much more like an ordinary guy rather than some daring criminal. On the subject of characterizations, let's look at how this first Lupin animated series adapted the manga's eccentric cast of misfits. Lupin is portrayed by Yasuo Yamada, a voice actor who was the official Japanese dubbing actor for Clint Eastwood and Kermit the Frog, and who also had dubbing roles for several classic Disney animated characters. He isn't as notable as far as anime roles go, but he did have voices in Big X and Kamui the Ninja. Yamada was evidently already a fan of Lupin, having been given the manga by the director on a previous acting job to shape his performance. It's because of this that when Osumi asked him to voice Lupin, he accepted immediately. He would go on to voice the character in every Lupin anime except Fuma Conspiracy until his passing in 1995.
その通り。もう一つついでに覚えておいてくれ。俺は脱走の天才だね。
Yamada obviously had his work cut out for him, contrasting the many different faces of Lupin's personality, but it does it all with a surprisingly gentle sense of grace. Lupin is often an over-the-top character, but Yamada sounds like he's intentionally restraining from bursting out too much, letting his voice meld with the animation to combine into something that works wonders. There's a reason why Yamada played him for so long. His voice is a major factor in making Lupin's intelligent yet jovial demeanor work so well. As I mentioned last time, Jigen is played by Kiyoshi Kobayashi, who, at least in the initial episodes, balances a cooler, laid-back personality with a more goofy and bubbly side of Jigen. Especially in the A-production episodes, Jigen often acts more lackadaisical and spirited in Part 1, in a sharp contrast to his grittier and wearier personality later on. He still does his job as a foil for Lupin by prompting him to explain the situation, but it's done in a way that makes him seem more clueless. It's kind of a weird point, but I definitely picked up on a lot more silliness in this version of Jigen that feels out of place. Apparently, Eiko Masuyama wasn't brought on from the pilot film to voice Fujiko because she couldn't tackle Fujiko's sultrier scenes in detail. Instead, she's portrayed by Yukiko Nikaido, who doesn't appear to have a lot of other acting credits and would only be involved in the Lupin series for this show. Nikaido does a serviceable job here, portraying a softer and more doting Fujiko, though her performance does feel all the more noticeably off because she only got one chance to play the character. A-production purposefully de-emphasized Fujiko's sexiness and cold-heartedness in favor of a character who, yes, is sometimes manipulative and often acts independently, but can also be a major supporter and voice of reason within the group. Later shows dialed up her sex appeal quite a bit and make her a more active participant in the series, but in Part 1, she never gets the chance to take center stage and grow her character, barring a few moments here and there. Even in the episode where she has the most development, she's out of commission for most of it, leading to an odd situation where she hovers in the background for a lot of the show. Last time, I mentioned how Goemon's voice actor in Part 1, Chikao Otsuka, actually voiced Zenigata in the TV cut of the pilot film, and he was brought on to voice our favorite samurai instead. His work on the Lupin franchise didn't extend beyond this show, and if I'm being honest, I'm sorta glad for that. Not to demean Otsuka's talent, because he is an absolutely fantastic actor, but his performance as Goemon never really resonated with me. It's a little bit too nasally, too unrefined, not really capturing the calm, unwavering swordsman we've come to know him as. I understand they're capturing a younger Goemon here, one who doesn't have the full training of a samurai master, but I never felt like Goemon ever had much of an impact beyond his first few appearances, and Part 1 is one of the only Lupin anime where I think he doesn't need to be here. Finally, Inspector Zenigata, who's a Tokyo Metropolitan Police officer in this show, is voiced by Goro Naya, who played Goemon in the CinemaScope pilot film and would continue to voice Zenigata in every Lupin media except Fuma Conspiracy until he officially retired from the role in 2012.
ルパンなんてこったルパン信じられんもう1年になろうとしているのに一度も脱獄を企てんとは
Like Kobayashi as Jigen, Naya's evolution in the role throughout the years is something that's immediately noticeable if you compare the eras, and when you consider Zenigata's character, it's not hard to see why. Zenigata spends a lot of screen time screaming his lungs out, and it could not have been easy for Naya to maintain it over the decades. But that's also why Zenigata is my favorite character in this series, because he's so intensely dedicated to his job and to catching Lupin, and Naya nails that right out of the gate. Also, I would like to mention, since we're talking about voices, that Part 1 has recently received an English dub with the current standard crew, released on High Dive and on Discotek's Part 1 Blu-ray set. Unfortunately, due to time constraints, I'm not able to cover this dub in depth. In fact, as of writing this video, I haven't even seen it in full yet. From what I have seen, however, it's a very solid dub, faithful to the script while adapting it well for an English audience, and of course, the voice actors all do a great job. We'll talk more about this dub crew once Part 2 rolls around, since I think it's more appropriate to talk about it then, but I did want to bring it up now. What's cool about Part 1 is that it doesn't feel the need to shoehorn in each of the 5 main characters in every single episode. Of course, Lupin always appears, and Jigen only rarely misses out, but Fujiko, Zenigata, and Goemon don't show up just for the hell of it, they're only used when it's deemed necessary for the story. That makes Part 1's storylines a little tighter overall, especially in the Osumi era, which is especially impressive seeing as how each episode has less than half an hour to tell its narrative. Part 1 is also unique in its aesthetic elements, but this is mostly because the series hadn't found its full identity yet, and the creators were experimenting with how Lupin should look and sound. That includes the music composed by Charlie Kosei and Takeo Yamashita. This soundtrack was following up the pilot film score by Norio Maeda, whose jazzy, funky tunes for that project would ultimately establish the tone of Lupin's music going forward. Part 1, however, goes in a different direction that stands out as it was created before Lupin composer Yuji Ono started working on the series. This soundtrack takes on a smooth rock style, with a number of influences from folk, western, funk, and jazz music, also featuring more vocals that mostly boil down to a guy singing Lupin III over and over again, as if it needed to remind audiences what show they're watching. Unlike Ono's songs for this series, which have this sort of timeless jazz bend, Kosei and Yamashita's music is very 70s, almost acting as a sort of time capsule for the era. It's a good soundtrack overall, though not my favorite in the series. It does fit Part 1 very well, and the show's more minimalist use of its soundtrack helps mitigate the repetitive use of some of these songs. Unfortunately, the original tapes for this soundtrack have gone missing, meaning it's impossible to transfer over high-quality versions of the original music without re-recording it, which is a shame as it's definitely worth a listen. You can find some transfers from the show's music and effect track online, but this isn't a perfect solution as these renders contain sound effects that often get in the way of the instrumentation. There are official soundtrack releases, of course, but these are remixed versions made specifically for home media. As far as the original tracks, those aren't available anywhere as far as I'm aware. Since this is a show from 1971, it's somewhat dated in the animation department. It was incredible for its time, and you have to remember that these animators were doing something unprecedented, so all things considered, this is objectively pretty good, especially when the action gets going. But you can definitely see the seams coming apart and spot all the little mistakes and errors, in particular the lip movements. There's a number of instances where there are absolutely no mouth movements despite the characters talking. This is nitpicky, but the fact is, a lot of viewers aren't able to watch older shows like this because they get distracted by the older production values, and I think it's fair to warn people who are interested in watching Part 1 of that ahead of time. It should also be noted that Lupin wears a green jacket in this series, as opposed to Monkey Punch's preferred red jacket, which was also used in the pilot film. Because of that, it's often associated with more mature Lupin stories, but the reasoning behind it is much simpler. Apparently, this color was chosen because televisions at the time had difficulties processing red, and green was a safer option for the main character's outfit. Let's briefly talk about some of the episodes from the show before we wrap up. There's a lot of classics, like Lupin going up against the magician Paikal, Zenigata watching over Lupin in prison for a year, Kyosuke Mamo and his time machine, Lupin and Jigen forced to perform a heist for a villainous nightclub owner, and Police Inspector Ganimard III teaming up with Zenigata to take Lupin's gang down. Many of these episodes end with a climactic and often explosive finale, with Lupin usually ending up either in a worse spot than he was before or getting the last laugh over his opponent, but usually without a treasure to show for it. Part 2 would really play up that last part, but the best episodes of Part 1 not only build on suspense, but also release the built-up tension at just the right moment. That doesn't mean Part 1 is always a winner, as some of its episodes definitely strike out. Most of them result from just not having enough good tension or not giving us enough reason to care about the conflict. I couldn't tell you anything really about the episode with the flower girl, or Fujiko's attempts to revive a mob boss, or Lupin and Jigen fighting Fujiko over stolen diamonds, for instance. These episodes don't invest the viewer as much and leave them little to remember compared to the better ones. At some point, I would love to talk about all of these episodes in detail, but for now, I will say that Part 1 does have more hits than misses on the whole. What's interesting is that the best episodes, at least for me, are split between the Osumi and A production eras, and while I do slightly prefer the tone of the later episodes, there's still lots to enjoy in the early adventures. I have come to seriously appreciate this series since it balances a mature tone and elements from the manga while upping the action and adventure to create something truly special. I don't think we've really ever gotten anything like this show in the series since, because it feels both incredibly of its era and very timeless as well. The show can get pretty crazy sometimes, but this iteration has so many subtle elements that it all comes together in an excellent package. And as its success in reruns would prove, it was able to find its audience in the end, even if it took a little time.